YouTube, Chelsea the Reading Outlaw here to do a review of the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. The three books in this trilogy are Mistborn, the Well of Ascension, and the Hero of Ages. Just to let you guys know off the top, I am not going to do much of a plot wrap up because this is a really hard series to wrap up in any kind of concise manner. I will link to some videos below of some people who I think do a really good job summing up the books, but I will just end up spending the whole video talking about that if I try and do it. So instead, I'm going to just give the loosest possible overview, which is to say that the Mistborn series is the story of Vin and Elend and their groups rise to knowledge and rise to power in the final kingdom, in the final empire. And it's really just my favorite things about it. I'll get into some of the things I didn't like, I'll get into, but that is kind of the very most loose explanation of plot that I can give. And like I said, you guys can check the videos down below to get a little more info. There's always also the Goodreads. Getting into some of the stuff that I did and didn't like about the book, these three books were my first introduction to Brandon Sanderson, so that was definitely something. I definitely think that some of the things that Brandon Sanderson has working best for him are his accessibility of writing and his accessibility of characters, and everything is just laid out in such a way that it's easy to understand and it's easy to kind of get into, even if maybe fantasy or science fiction aren't necessarily books or genres that you're already super into. I think Brandon Sanderson, especially in these books, kind of opens the door and makes that a thing that's easier for people to gain access to. I also think that this is the magic system in this book, which consists of burning different metals to do different things, both to yourself and also to other people, both physically and emotionally. I just think that that magic system is one of the best that I've seen in a lot of modern fantasy books. I think that it not only works the best in terms of being able to see the concrete and understand the concrete, but I also think it's just explained enough that you can, like I just said, that it's concrete and you can understand it, but there's some fluidity to it, which allows it to keep it from being too rigid and keeps it in the fantasy category as opposed to veering over into science fiction. In speaking a little bit more about the characters, I will say that the characters, I think, in these books definitely get worse before they get better. I did not like Elend at all, really, ever. I thought the part in the second book where he became an Allomancer was probably one of the dorkiest things that I've ever heard about. I mean, it just seemed like such a cop-out in the moment. And once you read the third book, you can kind of understand why. That's going to be kind of a running theme. The third book in the series definitely makes clear a lot of what happens in the first two books. It's definitely a trilogy in which that is the case. If you're kind of hoping for little bits as you go along, there are some, but really you got to read all the way through to the third book to get the full impact of the series, which, take that to be what it is, a drawback, a positive, whichever. That's the way I saw it. But in talking about other characters, I also think it's really important to know that Vin, I think, gets better as the books go on. For me, in the first two books, especially in the second book, she gets a little whiny and she gets a little existential. And I understand that she's dealing with a lot of knowledge and a lot of, things about her life that weren't necessarily the case before book one. But I just think that she gets really whiny. By the third book, she gets better. In the second book, we meet another Allomancer named Zane, who I absolutely hated. I did not understand what his point in the book was, other than to give Vin a concentrated enemy to focus on. Didn't really care for him too much. I think that the hero of this book and my favorite character is Sazed, who is he's called a terraceman. He's a keeper, basically. He's kind of like an advisor and a philosophical and political knowledge. He studies religions mainly. That becomes really important, especially in the later books. That's one thing that I think that the books doesn't get talked about much when it comes to these books, is that I think that they are really good or really interesting discussions of faith and religion and some of the things that we expect out of our faith and what we expect faith to give to us in the universe, whether we are religious people or not. There's some really interesting struggles and dichotomies that go on there. Some of the underlying bones and architecture of the story depend on these issues of faith and these questions of faith in the people prophesied before the characters we meet ever come into contact with them. And so I think that there is definitely some interesting stuff to dig into there when it comes to prophecies and who prophecies fit and how we take prophecies and force them to fit our times. I also thought it was really, really cool that the villain in the book, like the big villain, the mist, the deepness, ruin, those things, they all, Ruin has a power over words, so he can change words that are like written down or said unless they are written into metal. And so I just thought that that was a really cool little plot point that I would not have necessarily have thought of beforehand, because I think that's a really insidious way for enemies to kind of make their make their will come to pass. And I just have never seen something like that before. These have mainly just been a lot of really disjointed thoughts. I'm looking at my little notebook to see what I wrote down, to see if there's anything else that I wanted to hit on. Yeah, I think I basically hit all of it. One of the things that definitely I think that you should take away from this book is that even if fantasy is not necessarily a genre in which you feel super comfortable or super experienced, this I think would be a really good way to kind of find an intro to that. If you're starting or looking only at the first book, I will say that there is that the characterization is light, that it starts light and gets better as you go through the books. The characters don't necessarily get better, but the characterization gets better and your knowledge of the characters gets better. I also think that if you're looking for something that's kind of action heavy or moves along the plot at like a really quick pace, that this book might not necessarily be for you. There are a lot of really good fight scenes, and the fight scenes are really well handled. But in the first book, there's a lot of like political scheming and plotting, and not enough, or not as much like blatant out and out revolution. And so if that's something you're looking for, be forewarned. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book. These books, I gave the first book a 4 stars, the second book a 3 stars, and the last book a 5 stars. Like I said, I think if you're going to start, you should make the commitment and go all the way through to the last book. But one way or the other, I would definitely at least give the first one a try, because I think everybody needs to have at least a little taste of the Mistborn in their life. All right, that is my very disjointed final thoughts on the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. As always, like, subscribe, and comment down below letting me know what you thought of the books, or letting me know what you think I should read next, especially by Brandon Sanderson. All right, guys, hope you guys are all having a good Monday, and I will see you around. Bye.